Does your commuter rail system have one line? That one line that just stands out from the rest of the system for one reason or another? Whether it be due to short length, low ridership, odd placement, or just straight up different. Well, I'm here to point out this line, go over its history, explain why it's so odd, and what can be done to fix it. All of this and more in this episode of Fixing Your Branch Line. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fixing Your Branch Line, the series where I casually call out a branch line for being somewhat different, go over its history and flaws, and suggest what can be done to fix it. With the last episode focusing on the only branch of New Jersey Transit to terminate at Philadelphia, I might as well continue our trip down the Northeast by focusing on the commuter rail agency that primarily serves the greater Philly region, SEPTA. Just like the last two episodes, this commuter rail agency was established in the mid-1980s to take over public transit in the greater Philadelphia region, including buses, streetcars, subways, and in the interest of this video, commuter rail routes. Before the official formation of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, commuter rail routes were operated by two rivaling railroads, the Pennsylvania and the Reading, whose various differences ranging from their infrastructure to routing still last to this day, as the SEPTA system is primarily separated between ex-Pennsy and ex-Reading lines. However, after a seemingly small and isolated New Jersey Transit branch led to a massively in-depth history about the Pennsylvania Reading seashore lines and complicated Philly routing with proposals so controversial that they allegedly prompted not one, not two, but three response videos by Alan Fisher, I'm relieved to announce that this branch line review is much simpler, as it's the smallest branch in the entire system, the Cynwyd Line. This route is unsurprisingly the least used in the system with a grand total of 5 stations at 6.1 miles long, only uses a single Silverliner car for passenger service, only runs on weekdays as the least frequent branch on the system, and is the only route that terminates at Suburban Station, instead of following the S-Bond-Drew running system through Jefferson and onto X-Reading routes. But just like the first episode of this series, this short line used to be much longer and play a much larger role in Philadelphia railroading, as it initially saw service to Norristown and beyond with remnants of its quad-tracked main line. So let's see what led to the rise and fall of the overlooked Cynwyd Line. In recent months, I've been following a group of Philadelphia-based urban planners and transit enthusiasts who make high-quality reviews of various commuter rail branches in the Northeast and beyond. One of them, Jared Cohen, just so happened to make a review of this very branch with another transit enthusiast, Classy Whale, and prevented me from pronouncing this line as Cynwyd. Since most of these Philly-based transit reviewers usually feature each other in their videos, I feel it would only be right to feature some of them in this very video reviewing a Philadelphia commuter rail line. Here to help review the history of the Cynwyd Line, please welcome one of the guest stars of that very video, which is none other than Classy Whale.
Thanks for having me as a guest, Pennsy fan. Hello everyone, and I'm Caleb, also known as Classy Whale. Here's a brief history of the Cynwyd Line, formerly known as the Pennsylvania Railroad's Schuylkill branch. Some of you may be wondering, how much history is there to a 6-mile-long branch line in the high-end neighborhood of Bala Cynwyd? Well, as a matter of fact, the present-day Cynwyd Line was originally much longer as it ran to Norristown and Reading, along with several other mid-state towns. Like many other railroads in the area, the Pennsylvania Railroad wanted to find ways to one-up their rival the Reading by building better rail connections to Philadelphia, but they were all in the mid-eastern regions of the state to take part in transporting some sweet, sweet anthracite coal. Since the Pensy's existing line to the coal fields involved a lengthy detour around Harrisburg, the railroad decided to build a new alignment to the upper Susquehanna watershed by sharing Lehigh Valley trackage and by following the Schuylkill River directly next to the main line of their fierce rival, the Reading. The Pennsy initially chartered 2 subsidiaries to build this line in 1882, the Philadelphia, Norristown, and Phoenixville Railroad, and the Phoenixville, Pottstown, and Reading Railroad. These would later be consolidated into the Pennsylvania Schuylkill Valley Railroad, with the full line to Bala connecting with the main line opening just 2 years later in 1884. But in that very same year, the Reading decided to start operating passenger service along the popular New York to Philly corridor, so the Pennsy decided to also introduce passenger service on their coal hauling line to Reading, directly next to their rival, with the line being electrified with many other Pennsy commuter lines in 1930. Here, Pennsy and Reading passenger trains would race neck and neck, with the 2 parallel lines only a few feet apart from each other. Also, the Pensy's route to Reading saw some pretty diverse power, including the classic G5 and E6 steam engines, as well as early Baldwin diesels for passenger and switching service, and even GG1s for both passenger and freight service. But in the end, the Pennsy was no match for the more popular Reading service along the same corridor, draining the Pensy's revenue, which wasn't helped by the construction of more highways in the area. Eventually, the Pennsy cut back passenger service to Norristown and then Manayunk in 1960, with the rest of the Pennsy line north of Ivy Ridge being abandoned in favor of the Reading route when the two railroads were incorporated into Conrail in 1976. The branch line, along with every other commuter rail line in Philadelphia, was officially incorporated into SEPTA in 1983 and was given the designation R6, along with the Norristown line, with the Manayunk station being replaced by a park and ride named Ivy Ridge. But this wouldn't last for long, as the commuter railroad cut back service to Cynwyd instead of repairing the Manayunk River Bridge. Technically, this also brought the end of passenger service on the entire branch, but political pressure resulted in the line being restored to Cynwyd in 1988. Although the bridge was refurbished about 10 years later, service was not restored on the upper half of the branch, even though the tracks were still intact. That is, until the railroad had them removed after selling the right-of-way to the Cynwyd Heritage Trail, which connects to the rest of the former Pennsy Schuylkill branch, which has also turned into a trail. Two other historic feats to note about this line is that it was the first branch to see a Silverliner 5 in revenue service in 2010, the last branch to see a Silverliner 3 in revenue service in 2012, and an Amtrak Keystone service train was accidentally diverted onto it in 2013. Nowadays, speaking from personal experience, the Cynwyd Line is perplexing. I love trains. I think that America should build more trains. I think that trains are grossly undervalued, but I do not get why this line is not a frickin' bus.
As one of the shortest commuter rail branch lines in the entire nation, second only to the Princeton Dinky, there honestly isn't much to say about the branch, other than the fact that it's been drastically reduced over the years. You know this branch was big when it used to have its own transfer station called 52nd Street with 2 levels. Starting off from the massive junction, we have a whopping 6-track main line as indicated by the quad-track bridge and 2 single bridges, but this is where easy determinations end. Now, the width of the overhead catenary poles usually determines how many tracks could fit in the area, but this branch doesn't really indicate the exact width of the right-of-way, as some of the catenaries are shorter than the bridge bases, but the right-of-way seems to hold about 3 to 4 tracks overall, just before Winefield Avenue Station where it merges into 2 tracks, with the renovated platform right on top of where the second track used to be. Bala has the same problem with its high-level platform on top of the right-of-way instead of renovating the existing platform, while Cynwyd has low-level platforms basically covering any region that doesn't have a track, since the platform merges into the Cynwyd Heritage Trail that continues on the branch line's former alignment to Ivy Ridge. Despite the widely ranging widths of the catenary poles, historic photos of the 3 stations on the line seem to suggest that the present-day branch once had 3 tracks, which was reduced to 2 local tracks and then just 1. Likewise, with this branch line shrinking in size over the years, frequencies on this line are equally small, with only 6 round trips a day on weekdays and 0 trains a day on weekends. Also, I'd like to introduce a timetable ranking a bit late into the series to compare the frequencies of each branch line, so the Cynwyd line gets a 4 out of 10. The small status of this branch also makes it unique in which it's the only branch line to utilize a single car, as well as the only line to start and end at Suburban Station instead of continuing through Jefferson Station and onto one of the X-Reading lines like every other branch in the system. And probably for good reason, since I don't think commuters who are used to at least 3 cars would appreciate a single car train from West Trenton during rush hour. Despite the many scalebacks that this branch witnessed over the years, the most significant proposal for this branch would undoubtedly be the Schuylkill Valley Metro. Starting in 2000, this study proposed not only restoring but electrifying passenger rail service from Philly to Reading, with half of the line running on the Cynwyd line with service on the Manayunk River Bridge restored, as well as service to King of Prussia because Mall. Although, the study was cancelled a few years later in 2006 since electrification for a large distance seemed too expensive for the transit agencies and Class 1 track owners to fund. Afterwards, there were various proposals over the years to restore service to Reading, with the most recent being the Schuylkill River Passenger Rail Authority in cooperation with Amtrak, but neither of them include the Cynwyd line in their alignments, with Amtrak for some reason using Norfolk Southern trackage right out of 30th Street Station to Norristown, with a completely separate Norristown station on the other side of the river. Other than that, there really haven't been any other stated improvements for this line. Even SEPTA's Reimagining Regional Rail document proposed earlier this year that surprisingly proposed the restoration of all of their diesel branches discounted the Cynwyd line. which would have been the shortest distance to restoring the entire plan. So with that said, what is my official diagnosis on the Cynwyd Line? I could easily say insert second track here and return to Ivy Ridge and call it a day, but that doesn't solve the branch's low ridership or low frequencies. I could easily state the obvious and essentially return the line to 1985, but for this video, I decided to think of something more outside the box. This diagnosis not only brings more traffic on the Cynwyd Line, but it also reduces traffic on a nearby commuter rail main line. This is something that I like to call the Norristown Loop. I feel this diagnosis is a bit anticlimactic because it was already mentioned with the Schuylkill Valley Metro proposal, but I'm basically suggesting the same thing up to Norristown. More specifically, I suggest redirecting the Norristown line onto the Cynwyd Line in addition to the existing X-Reading alignment, so this way it not only brings more traffic to the underutilized Cynwyd Line, but also frees up the X-Reading lines for more frequent trains from other SEPTA branches. Also, this doesn't necessarily include a full-on restoration to Reading, so if you're not scared of electrification costs, just use some dual-mode ALP45s, preferably from AMT or EXO since they have a large surplus of them now. Considering this consolidated commuter line would have multiple bidirectional trains a day on two different alignments, routing for commuters might be a bit confusing, so I would suggest either extending the Cynwyd Line all the way to Norristown on existing Reading trackage while replacing a bunch of existing Norristown line trains, or dedicate the Cynwyd Line for express service and the Norristown Line for local service or vice versa. Either way, a commuter service that evenly splits service to one of Philly's largest towns outside the city would bring more service through Cynwyd while easing congestion on the existing Norristown line in order to improve the flow of traffic on the greater Philadelphia rail network. Considering that SEPTA is comprised of former Pennsylvania and Reading branch lines, it would only be fair for me to cover an ex-Reading branch line as the honorable mention, and that honor, unsurprisingly, goes to the Fox Chase Line. Like many American rail lines, this route was initially constructed by a smaller single mainline railroad, in this case being the Philadelphia, Newtown, and New York Railroad, which initially proposed service all the way to New York City, or at least the Hudson River, but only got as far as Newtown, Pennsylvania by 1878 due to various laws that gave the Camden and Atlantic Railroad the exclusive right to run services to Philadelphia via New Jersey. Interestingly enough, this line was initially operated by the Pennsylvania Railroad as it spurred from the present-day Northeast Corridor, before being leased by the Reading only a year later, who operated the line ever since. Its present-day connection to the Reading Main Line was built a bit later in 1892, with the line from Olney to the NEC being called the Olney Branch, as Reading service from Philly to NYC used the faster present-day West Trenton Line, so the Fox Chase Branch remained at Newtown, with the railroad officially being merged into the Reading as late as 1945, and with electrification only reaching Fox Chase as late as 1966, since it was the last station on the branch within city limits. Diesel shuttle service on the branch would continue to Newtown until 1981, when all SEPTA's diesel routes were discontinued, but the Fox Chase branch would be the only line to somewhat restore diesel service by running a handful of RDCs on the shuttle for something known as a Fox Chase Rapid Transit Line, which would lead into union issues as it offered the same pay as a Rapid Transit Line, which is better explained in the Well There's Your Problem podcast episode on SEPTA. Likewise, the Rapid Transit Shuttle was finally discontinued in 1983, as the rest of the line became a trail with a good amount of the tracks still existing, although political pressure forced SEPTA to reconsider restoring service to Newtown by testing the infamous Leyland Pacer rail bus a good 2 years after passenger service ended. But since this rail bus is built on a 2-axle freight wagon frame, the ride was so bumpy that SEPTA sold the railbus to another operator immediately after its first test run. Afterwards, there were bids from private operators to continue the service not only on the Newtown branch, but also service from Norristown to Pottsville, but SEPTA didn't approve either of these plans since they involved non-union workers. It's so odd to think that we could have essentially had our first Bright Line right in Philadelphia to help out SEPTA. That's a great concept that could have set a precedent for more privately owned passenger operations in America to rival the state and federally owned services and result in much more passenger lines than we have today. Nowadays, the electrified Fox Chase line, designated as R8, uses a single electrified track, mostly parallel to the CSX Trenton line, and later continuing through Jefferson Station with service on the Media Wawa line and Airport line, with frequencies rating at a 7 out of 10 with 1 train per hour. Although, I must say that some of the stations along this branch are a bit odd, which only has a sidewalk and parking lot much larger than the station platform. Lawndale is only accessible by crossing over the CSX track and right behind an inaccessible golf course, and the bridge at Ryers unfortunately proves that the branch was built entirely single-tracked. But as mentioned earlier, the Newtown branch is thankfully being considered as one of the many diesel branches to hopefully be restored in the coming future, so it shows that SEPTA is at least considering the possibility of bringing service back to Newtown. Although, the plan didn't indicate whether Newtown service would be a continuation of dual-mode service or a diesel-powered shuttle based on its 15-mile length from Fox Chase. So with all of that said, my official diagnosis for this branch would be bring forth the wires. Not only should this branch be extended all the way to Newtown, but it should also be electrified since it's a much shorter route to electrify in the first place, in addition to all the environmental benefits of overhead wires. A diesel shuttle would make service on the branch inconvenient since it would still involve a transfer at Fox Chase for a relatively short distance afterwards. Passing sidings, or preferably a second track where possible, will be recommended through various portions of the line, although the exact location of these extra tracks will be determined by the frequencies and scheduling for the route. At the end of the day, the best way to connect various communities by rail to a nearby city is to have a one-seat ride with as few transfers as possible, and electrification of this relatively short but up-and-coming region would be perfect to not only restore much-needed service on the branch line, but also to enhance it with simple yet innovative methods. Although, if you do want to fulfill this branch line's initial purpose of connecting Newtown to New York City, you can always build a railway median or street running alignment along Route 332 and Highway 295 to connect with the West Trenton line, but I'll leave the viability of such a project up to you. Thank you all for watching this episode of Fixing Your Branch Line. Even though this episode is a bit shorter when compared to the previous two due to the Cynwyd Line's incredibly short length, it still had its fair share of surprises, such as the Schuylkill Valley Metro including both Norristown alignments in its proposal, the diversity of engines on the branch during the Pensy era, and the honorable mention including what could have been the first Bright Line. Not only do these branches need some sort of return to a previous era, but they can also be enhanced through other relatively simple means that ultimately benefit the greater regional rail network. Special thanks again to Classy Whale for guest starring on this episode, as it would only be right to include Philly-based urban planners in a video about Philly-based urban planning. Thank you again for watching. Credit for all the photos used go to their respective photographers, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Have a good day.